you. My wife's teasing me.
Yeah.
I'm actually an IT guy, so I should be able to do this pretty easily, but sometimes I just can't figure it out. Okay, so we are now live on YouTube, and I need to hit record in the meeting too. All right, welcome to Common Sense Bible Study, everyone. We are here with Dinah Dye of Foundations in Torah Ministries. I think I got that name right.
Mm-hmm.
Our theme at Common Sense Bible Study this month is leaving Egypt. And what I mean by that is some experience or some moment in your life that convinced you that you were headed the wrong path, whether it's in your faith or God wanted you in some kind of ministry or in some role in life and you were headed the wrong direction, and God grabbed your attention and pointed you in a new direction, the right way. And sometimes those things change over time. You might have multiple leaving Egypt experiences throughout your lifetime. For most of us, we had a moment when we really discovered who Jesus was, or Yeshua, depending on which name you want to use. I'm fine with either one. Maybe you grew up in church, maybe you didn't, but you heard about him, and then just one day everything clicked and you understood, and you finally really believed in him. That's a leaving Egypt kind of moment. And sometimes these moments don't happen in an instant. They can take years. And I've had those experiences where trouble in my marriage, with family, one crisis after another led me to a point where I was searching for answers, and it took me years to find what I was looking for. But when I did, it was like somebody just pulled open all the curtains and looked around and said, "Oh, how did I get here?" So that's what we're talking about this month. I started a conversation in the portal already. So if you go to commonsensebiblestudy.com and log in, look for the monthly themes and quests. There's like a hashtag or topics, I think they're called. Look for that. It might be right at the top of the portal. I'm interested in your stories too. What experiences have you had in life that brought you out of some metaphorical Egypt, headed for the promised land? So feel free to share your stories. If you're new to Common Sense Bible Study, I know we have a number of new people in the call tonight. Our goal is to cut through all of the doctrine and theological jargon to find out what the scriptures really say. Like, they were written to be understood by real people, not by theologians, but by shepherds and farmers and people in all walks of life. We're supposed to understand the scriptures. They're not supposed to be that hard. They are deep. I mean, there's lots of layers and connections and all kinds of things going on, but the plain meaning shouldn't really be that hard. And we really mess things up. So that's our goal at Common Sense Bible Study, is to simplify the scriptures and try to lay things out so that just ordinary people can feel confident in reading and understanding them for themselves. So if you're new, I hope you stick around. We do a weekly Bible study on Thursday night. We're going through the book of Romans right now. I think we're taking the month of April off because this last year has been kind of high pressure, lots going on. So I needed some time to get caught up on some work. So we're taking the month of April off, but in May, we're going to resume at Romans 9, verse 8, I think, is where we're at. And it's only taken us 9 months to get that far. So we'll be through Romans in a jiffy here any day now, or next year sometime. I'm not, maybe 2027. I don't know. We'll get there. So as I said, our guest tonight is Dinah Dye. Let me just give you a little bit. I got so many windows open. I got to find my notes. Dr. Dinah Dye, she's a doctor of ministry in Hebraic studies and Christianity. Originally from Canada, grew up in a conservative Jewish home. Did some searching in her youth, traveled the world, got involved in the New Age movement, and I'll let her tell the rest of the story from there. But a couple of things that I want to point out before we get started in that conversation is that Dr. Dye also has some great resources online. She's got several books. One series that I bought the first one and haven't started reading it yet, The Temple Revealed in Creation. In the first book is a portrait of the family, which really caught my eye. And I've heard her speak on this topic before, the temple in the garden and how these things lay out a pattern for the family. And, the pattern of God is everywhere, that he is in the garden, he's in the tabernacle, he's in the temple and the family, that everything in creation is, we're not God, obviously, but he's created us in his image. And so there are these patterns of 3 and 7 and these things that work out all through creation. So that one really caught my attention because I spent a lot of time thinking about that one topic years ago. And it was probably the biggest thing that triggered my own personal leaving Egypt moment, was searching the scriptures, trying to understand how a family is supposed to work. And I got kind of hyper fixated on that for a few years. So I'm looking forward to starting that. Dr. Dye has a couple of websites, DinahDye.com. And we'll put those in the notes so that you don't have to worry about learning to spell it if you don't know how to spell her name. And foundationsandtorah.com. So Dr. Dye, I'm just going to call you Dinah because Dr. Dye sounds weird.
Yeah, no, it's I do, Dinah. Yeah.
Okay. From your bio on your website, you grew up in a conservative Jewish home, but you are a follower of Yeshua now and teaching Torah to believers in Yeshua, which offends everybody. It offends the Christians, it offends the Jews. First off, I'm curious how you got to that point. I mean, what does your family think about this? How did you get from conservative Judaism? Is that not Reform, but Orthodox
It's kind of in the
Judaism,
middle.
or okay.
Yeah, it's between Orthodox and Reform. Well, Reform's really on the edge of New Age, and Orthodox, they're in their own camp.
Mm-hmm.
I think conservatives couldn't figure out where they wanted to be, so they created their own little environment.
Yeah. Well, people do that. We can't really help it. We've got to create our own little camps and wall ourselves off from everybody else.
For sure. So I was thinking, I'm an equal opportunity offense person.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. I was thinking too. Every year from the time I was born, we celebrated Passover, and I'm thinking I came out of Egypt every year. You know how people go to the altar every year and get saved?
Mm-hmm.
I think I came out of Egypt every year, kind of the same way.
Yeah,
But
it's a lot like the wilderness, where God leads us through, 42 different camps in the wilderness. None of them were the promised land, but everyone got you a little bit closer.
Got me a little bit closer. So what I mean, my story is long, so I don't want to, we're not going to go into the whole thing, but there were several things that I think that are kind of foundational for me finally meeting Yeshua, face to face. And that was my family. We had lived in one part of the city in Ottawa where the Jewish community was, and then they moved to the complete opposite part of the city, in which there was not one other living Jew there. So we were just surrounded. And all my friends in school, public school, high school, etc., were all, quote, Christians who attended some sort of church. And that meant since I spent a lot of time with my friends, they would drag me to church in the hope that somehow, I guess, I would get saved. And early on in public school, back in the day when you could actually pray and talk about God in public school, we had a 20-minute session in which they would teach about Christianity. And one of the ways they always ended the session was with the Lord's Prayer. So around, 6, 7, 8 in there, I learned the Lord's Prayer, and those seeds were planted. Those were eternal seeds that were planted. I had no idea what it meant, but that was something that I fell back on in some trying times. So everyone, of course, celebrated Christmas where we lived, And my mother felt bad because we didn't. So she bought a fake lemon tree and put it in the living room, and she would put presents under the fake lemon tree so that
Hmm,
we fit into the neighborhood. And
that's
then
interesting.
Christmas morning, I would head out to all my friends' houses in which their parents had put presents under the tree for me. So I would go picking up my presents and I would bring them back home. I had quite a haul on those mornings. So I thought Christmas was pretty cool. I had no understanding of what it was.
Hmm.
So again, seeds were planted all through those. Those are important years and important times. So fast forward into high school where I completely lost my mind and I just felt that Judaism just wasn't doing it for me. I felt I had a relationship with God. I talked to him almost every night before bed, but I saw the hypocrisy in the synagogue and it was massive. So we would go to, especially on the high holy days, Rosh Hashanah, we would go to synagogue and the men sat on one side and the women on the other side, and the women would be gossiping about what other women were wearing, and the men were talking real estate. And I'm like, this doesn't make much sense to me. But my grandfather, who was Orthodox, you in those years you paid for your seat, so he would pay top dollar so he could sit at the very front. And he was a devoted Orthodox Jew. He walked to synagogue every week. He ate kosher, so I did have that kind of influence. But Judaism in itself just left me cold, and mostly because of relationships. Maybe not so much about how people observe, but I watched people in action, and it was not pretty. So I went in, and New Age became my desired church du jour. And I spent an awful lot of time in that. And of course, close friends, we were all involved in it. And I don't want to drag you through that entire story because it's kind of massive as well. But I did a lot of traveling, all in search. Everything comes down to, who am I? Why am I here? What on earth am I doing? Is there a God? Does he care about me? All the questions that everybody always asks were the question I asked. And so going through the various new age movement, I would ask those questions and they were never answered. It was the hippies, the drug culture, all that stuff. I was, this is the 1970s, and went to concerts and was obsessed with music. And you know I just read some, well, no, never mind, I won't go into that. But anyways, so along about, I'm going to say towards the well, actually, it's early 70s, 1972. I had already graduated from high school. I was sick of Ottawa. I was sick of the people. I was sick of my family. I was sick of myself. So I flew over to Europe, and by myself. I don't know how or why I did it. I would never allow my children to do that today, ever. And the very first day I was in the Victoria Tube Station in London, walked out and the thing blew up. It was an IRA bomb. And so began my illustrious 5-year traveling. I had traveled out with a 15-pound backpack all over, Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, eventually end up in Central America, etc. Again, it was just this search. So everything I did had that at the back of my mind, like, how do I find the truth? Now, I did get to spend time in Israel in 1974, shortly after the Yom Kippur War, and that was very sobering. In fact, I had worked at a ski area in Switzerland, and one of the perks at the end of the end of the winter, is you could fly anywhere in the world you wanted free through this student organization. So I elected to go to Israel. Unfortunately, on our way, there was a bomb scare on the plane. We had to stop in Athens and clear the deck, and eventually got back on, flew back into Israel. And the very first night I remember, so back then, Lod Airport, if any of you have been to, I mean, that's like one really nice airport. Well, back then it was like a thatched hut. There were no sides. It was just, grassy roof. And we had to spend the night on the floor in the Lod Airport under, I don't know if it was a Kalashnikov or an M16. I wouldn't know the
Hmm.
difference at that time. So that was my beginning experience in Israel. So I spent about 4 to 5 months in Israel. I lived on a kibbutz, Degania Aleph, for any of you who have been to Israel. It's at the southern end of the Sea of Galilee. It was the very first kibbutz established by Moshe Dayan, the general with the patch. And I learned one of the main things, my job was to prune banana trees, and I also learned how to cut cauliflower, which I am still very gifted at today. It was quite a wonderful, really experience. I worked in the volunteer camp, and that particular period of time in Europe was very volatile. There were military coups and uprisings and quite a bit of violence all over Europe in the 70s. And of course, you didn't want to be an American. They hated Americans. So I proudly plastered my Canadian flag on my backpack. And that opened some doors for sure. But one of the things that happened to me while I was staying on Degania Aleph is I had a dream one night. And I dreamt that a bunch of terrorists came on the kibbutz and they were dressed like hippies. And they came in and they had weapons under their long coats, and they just basically began to murder everyone around. I woke up, I was so disturbed, I didn't really understand the dream, but about maybe a week or so later, I can't think of the name of the town. I've got it in my story, but there were some terrorists, Palestinian terrorists, who had taken captive of a school up north and murdered all these children. It was just horrendous, and they were dressed like hippies. I mean, just left me chilled to the bone, that whole event. And of course, the entire country was on alert. Then this is going to be 1974 when that happened, the fall, I think. I'm trying to remember, get my dates right. So, I had made several friends who lived up in the Golan Heights, and, we've got the Yom Kippur War, and we just got tanks strewn, littered all over the place. I did meet a nice Dutch man who was a Christian who talked to me about Yeshua. So those seeds were planted once again. In fact, he took me on the Via Dolorosa, the Stations of the Cross in Jerusalem, where, we went from one to another, and he's explaining all this stuff to me. I had no idea, but it sounded pretty good, and it was so that was kind of a unique experience. I came back to the United States after that. I mean, I'm cutting this short, right? There's a lot more there. And I was bored out of my mind, and I just, my mother and I butt heads, as daughters and mothers often do.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend and I decided to head down to Guatemala. Why we picked Guatemala, I have no idea, but we ended up in Lake Panajachel in northern Guatemala on the lake there. I rented a home with this other gal, and I had a dream one night that there was an earthquake. About a week later, we saw the animals acting very strange, and February 4th, 1974, is it 74, 76? I don't know. Anyways, the ground shook. My bed flew across the floor, and I tried to get off it. No way, Jose. And we had it was a 7.9 earthquake, followed a week later by an 8.3.
Wow.
And basically we had to live outside in the grass for months. Couldn't get out of the country. And that was my first sort of introduction to governments that don't work well, in which the federales came in and basically hijacked all the food that was in the town where I lived. So the Indians, they took all the food that belonged to the Indians because they had open markets, and that's where you bought food. And they had a grocery store. So they confiscated all that. Isn't that special? So there we were, not living on much. That was quite, I always say that was a moving experience, but that propelled me out of the country once we could leave. And I went to San Francisco. And I went to San Francisco because that's where I was born. So even though I was Canadian, I was born in San Francisco. And then I got involved in all kinds of strange stuff. I was like marching for Che Guevara, for communists. A friend of mine, like, I have no skills at this point, right? All I know how to do is travel. And this friend of mine offered me a job, believe it or not. I was selling Chinese kimonos. Like, every time I think about that, I just laugh. I don't even know what I'm doing. So that was an interesting experience. So my friend and I, Jane, who I'd met in Guatemala, we decided that we were going to move to Taos, New Mexico, because it was a high place, kind of along the lines as the Himalayas or Tibet or
Hmm.
something. So off we drove off in our VW bus, of course, to move to Taos. And it was Taos is that's where that's where the stuff happened. And we were really coming to the end of the search here, right? How many years can you live in a backpack and how many years can you indulge yourself by traveling and, spending voluminous amounts of time producing nothing? So that was,
Hmm.
essentially my life. And so a friend of mine told me about this place called the Quinby Center, which was down south in Los Alamos. Not Los Alamos, excuse me, Alamogordo, the White Sands Missile Range now. Interesting.
Hmm.
So I went down and, this is a new age deal. And the guy, waved crystal over me, got to smooth down the chakras, your energy is rising and stuff like that. And he told me in my last life that I was a disciple of Christ in Israel. And then I spent time, following Yeshua around the country. And then somehow I made it to Rome and lived in the catacombs with Peter. I was just fascinated. I thought, well, that is just so cool. And so then I began reading all these books about Peter and Paul,
Hmm.
etc. And right in about there, um, shortly before, I'll have to tell you a little event, but I ended up reading the Bible cover to cover in 1 week, the entire thing. Now, I was very familiar with the Old Testament, needless to say, knew all the stories. I had never read the New Testament. So even though I heard stuff from people, I had never read it. I didn't know what it said. And I was just blown away by the Jewishness of it.
Hmm.
Hello, how come nobody sees this? And my moment, of exiting Egypt was when I got to the story of the woman caught in the act of adultery. Let he who's without sin cast the first stone. Was kind of like, whoa. I couldn't really say, I didn't mentally process and analyze it. It just hit. It just hit
Hmm.
in the heart that after all this ridiculous searching for all these years, there truly is one who loves you, who has made these words from the Bible easy to understand for everyone and based on love. And those were my criteria in my search. Now, leading up to this, and I've shared this story before, and some of you may have heard it, but my friend Jane and I were invited to up to an ashram, and they were having a big event there, and because we were kind of technically part of the community. And this was the years of Baba Ram Dass, Neem Karoli Baba, Timothy Leary, the whole drug culture, tune in, turn on, be here now, all that sort of thing. And these guys had commissioned a statue of the Hindu god Hanuman to be made in Sri Lanka, and they were going to unveil it at this event that we were at. And it had come all the way from Sri Lanka to San Francisco, and they rolled it out here to Taos, New Mexico. And we're at the foot of the mountain, Taos Mountain, the high place. And, it's a wonderful, beautiful day in September, and the prayer flags are all blowing in the wind, and the food is just great. And then here they come with the statue in a box, and they began to open up the crate, with a crowbar. I remember distinctly pulling off those slats, and everybody was standing, and I think there was about 100 people or so. And then all of a sudden, there it was, this monkey god, and it's, wearing this lovely white outfit, holding an orange outfit, excuse me, holding a golden scepter, and the statue itself is white marble. Just try to picture that against the blue New Mexico sky. That was quite a contrast. And at that very moment, everybody there bowed down to that statue. Everybody got down on their knees and just worshiped. And Jane and I just stood there. I was aghast. And I did, as I've shared in my story, I heard without any doubt the audible voice of the Lord saying, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." So if there was anything in the Old Testament, the Tanakh, that I still remembered from the Torah, it was that. And we looked at each other, and I still to this day think, if I had bowed down, would I be here today? Like, would I have just sold my soul to
Hmm.
to whatever? And we didn't. And it was shortly after that, I went to an Assemblies of God church. Of course, they give an altar call every 5 minutes. And I believe I went forward and, okay, I have no idea what this means, but I think I'm supposed to do this. So I do it. And we joined the church. And about a week later, they made me in charge of the youth. Now, I don't know anything, right? I do know the Torah, I do know the Tanakh, but I don't know anything. So I just taught the kids the festivals. That was the only thing that I knew. I always said those kids don't know how good they had it. And so we, just plugged in. I eventually, I met my husband there, and we were married, had kids, and, went through the whole drill. And we homeschooled. I refused to send my kids to public school. And this is the late 80s going, I am not putting my kids in there. So yeah, we just, we really immersed ourselves in the church. But needless to say, there was conflict.
Mhm.
And I could not figure out where I fit. So, it's a nice Jewish girl like you doing in a place like this. And I kept trying to reach out. I know you remember Jews for Jesus, some
Yep.
organizations like that. They would have events out in California. So I would try to go to be with my comrades in arms, my Jewish brethren who believed in Yeshua. But even then, a lot of them were like Lutherans or Baptists or stuff, and it didn't feel like even in those movements that they were not Torah observant at all. They had kind of sold out to the Christian faith as well. So it was very confusing time for me. But I was just really, I just dove into research. So now we're 40 years, since all that happened. So we were in the assemblies probably 20 years. Now we went through a variety of pastors. Our first pastor was wonderful because he actually spent time in Israel. Later, he and his wife worked in Palestinian refugee camps, and they were wonderful people. They had the really coolest cafe in Beert State, in not too far from Ramallah. But I digress. And he was totally open. We did Passover every year from the first year I was in the church, because I knew how to do it, and we would do it,
Mhm.
and he was really excited. But then over time, as pastors come and pastors go, we got one who could not handle me at all. Now, by this time, I have really grown in my understanding and my ability to connect the New Testament to the Tanakh. Off the charts, being able to just see all this. And the more I saw and the more I taught, the worse it got. He finally, told my husband to better put a leash on me, because this is not working well. So we ended up leaving and going to a Foursquare church, where the pastor there, who's now actually one of our closest friends, we walk in, we sit down. Now, what pastor doesn't want to hear this? We come in, we sit down, we say, we've been in the assemblies, we've got 7 ministries between us. What do you want us to do? We'll do it all. So he ended up letting me teach everything, like anything I wanted. Every festival we went through, he made me the director of the Bible Institute. My husband was driving the bus for, bringing kids in. I mean, we were doing it all. It was great until he left and decided that he was going to go to the mission field. So there was no leader and nobody wanted me. I did fill in from time to time. But they did bring in a guy who was from the Name It, Claim It bunch out in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma.
Mhm.
And around that time, I was just doing a Bible study, once a week. Why I did this, I don't know, but I picked the book of Revelation and decided to teach it from a purely Jewish perspective.
That
Well,
would be interesting.
it was very interesting. It was back in the 90s. So the pastor, the soon-to-be pastor, in front of everybody stands up and he says, "How is any of this relevant?" So, never forget that. That was another one of my moments where I just went, "What on earth? Like, you're not tracking here at all, and you're going to be the pastor." And we kind of knew we were pretty well done with the church thing. We had invested tremendous resources, time, and energy and everything to try to build the church and to try to bring the message of the Torah and the festival, everything. And some people got it and most people didn't. And we just became frustrated. And eventually we started a group in our home. And well, there's more, but I might take a breath here and see if you have any questions or comments.
I was just typing in the chat to remind people that they need to start getting their questions ready. So I am curious about how your birth family. I mean, obviously there are different definitions of family, like church family, all that kind of thing. The family you grew up in, your
Yeah.
conservative Jewish family. How did they react to all this?
So initially, well, my parents were actually fine. Now you have to understand that every time I came home, I was doing something different.
Mm-hmm.
Like you name it, I was doing it. So it was like, oh gosh, here she goes again. What is she involved in now? But the difference with this was that I actually asked my parents to forgive me for being such a reprobate, daughter, doing such stupid things. That was new. So they knew that it was different, because that's not how that works. Now, my uncle and aunt, my uncle was the president of the synagogue. It did not go
Mm-hmm.
over all that well. In fact, they refused to come to my wedding out here in Taos because that would have been too much. Although two of his children ended up marrying Gentiles. So, I was just ahead of the curve. My grandfather, who is Orthodox Jew, I sat down with him. I wrote him a long letter, asked his forgiveness, for just all of the stuff. And his name was Yirmiyahu. Don't you love it?
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yirmiyahu. And we were talking, and I think we might have even been talking about the book of Yirmiyahu. But he said something to me that just never left. I'm not even sure I know what he meant. But I shared with him the gospel to the best of my ability in a framework that he could understand. It wasn't Christianese. And he looked at me and he said, you and I, we believe the same thing. So I took that as a good to go. And, as I said, I never really asked him what he meant by that. I
Mm-hmm.
just, so overall, I mean, my parents have been extremely supportive throughout the years. My dad passed away a few years ago, but it was never an issue. It was really only my uncle. Now, since I didn't live in Ottawa, that was significant because there's no way on planet Earth I could have been involved in any way in the synagogue that we went to. Like, and my parents they would have experienced quite a bit of shame had I still lived in Ottawa and trying to pursue this walk,
Mm-hmm.
that it would not have worked out well for my family. So it was a good thing in a lot of ways that I lived 3,500 miles away because they didn't have to deal with it. So yeah, that's I was fortunate because I did have friends where they were just cut off completely, but I didn't experience that.
Yeah, my parents were pretty strict growing up. I grew up in the Assemblies of God, and no drinking, no dancing, no smoking. They were
No
pretty
light.
strict on those kinds of things. Actual theology, they were pretty loose on that.
Okay.
But I was too young to be a hippie, and I was, for the most part, I was a rule follower. I was a compliant child, but I do my own thinking, and when I come to a conclusion, I run with it, and I don't understand why other people don't. So when I started experiencing life outside of my little bubble, I left home when I was 17, enlisted in the Air Force. Um, I went to a tech school where my roommate was an atheist who was very smart, and we spent probably every night for 9, 10 months arguing politics, theology, history, whatever we could think of. And I came away with that with some new ideas. And every time I go home to visit, my parents are like, "Okay, what fad are you into now? What phase are you
Right.
in?" And then late '90s, I start talking about how Paul's writings, everything that he taught was based on this Old Testament. So why are we skipping all this stuff? How are we supposed to understand what Paul is saying if we don't understand this? So I started going back and trying to understand the text that Paul was using as the basis for his teachings. And then I realized that it's not just Paul, it's everybody in the New Testament. Yeshua, he's also basing his teachings on the Old Testament. And if you don't understand Torah and what the prophets are talking about, you're really not going to really fully understand what Yeshua is saying, especially since everybody that he was talking to also had that basis.
And that's
And
kind, that's, I mean, when somebody gets that, that's the game changer. That's the
mhm,
paradigm shift. Everything is turned upside down and you're never the same again.
yeah, well, I remember a conversation with my dad where he was essentially, you have given up the faith, you're
Yeah.
throwing Jesus under the bus, and but I know this is a fad, you'll get over it. And my mom was like, I know you mean well, and you're smart, but we brought you up right, so you're going to come back. It's like, well, here we are 25 years later, I'm still following this phase. it,
Amen.
it hasn't
Yeah.
gone anywhere, but they've adjusted and they've accepted it.
Well, cool.
So
I
kind of
mean,
similar in that
yeah,
respect.
because now it's, I'm going on like 43, 44 years. So
Hmm.
I think this is where I'm supposed to be. And my parents certainly recognize that. Yeah, and through all those, I mean, I've always been a student of history. And so through all those years, it was sort of easy to translate from, just looking at history broadly into seeing the value of understanding the historical through the Bible, which
Hmm.
is an area that people are still very weak in. I'm always surprised. And so I think because of that, because of that lack, many have a tendency to focus in on the future, okay, because they don't know squat about, the historical. And I've lately just kind of said, this whole where we are at now, this is not about quote future prophecy. This is about historical prophecy in that Yeshua and all the writings, but in Yeshua in particular, almost everything out of his mouth is taking us back to a historical period for a specific purpose, to draw attention to that he has been that fulfillment, and not so much about what's going to happen in 2023. And I do think that's the more you study history, the more you can kind of rest in that. And so I really, my MO in all of this is learning culture and history and understanding context and language, all those things. And that has made a tremendous difference and in my growth, in my understanding, and in being able to exercise, wisdom. And so
Hmm.
I just really encourage people. And the thing you have to remember is that, nothing's static in the Bible. Just, you have one period of history, maybe around the time of Abraham. Well, that's not the same history that we have when we get to the Kings. And it's not the same history we have when they're in the Babylonian exile. So you need to learn where you are in the Bible and then just go for it and start digging the background out. And
Hmm.
then once you get into the New Testament, if you've laid that really solid foundation, it's, some of it's going to be easier to understand.
Okay, thank you. Just noticed some people who came in late. Welcome, Timothy, Kevin, Peter, Shuba. If I'm pronouncing that name right, I hope I am. Um, Glad you're all here. In case, I'm pretty sure you know what we're here for, or you wouldn't be here. But we're talking with Dr. Dinah Dye um, about her personal leaving Egypt experience. And it sounds like there wasn't really a single moment, but I mean, there was definitely the moment at Taos with the monkey god, and that
Mhm.
was, I hate to use the word epiphany because of where it comes from, but that's in English,
Is what it
that's what
is.
it means. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
it absolutely was.
yeah, but there are all these things that God was using to lay the groundwork for that ahead of time.
Hmm.
Your parents allowing you to be exposed to what are essentially pagan religious practices, at least from their perspective,
Yeah.
and allowing you to associate with your Christian neighbors and participate in their traditions.
And that's big because that wasn't the case for the other parts of my family. They were,
Hmm.
involved in the Orthodox synagogue downtown. I said where we had lived until we moved out to the West End. and they, they were not. And so I, like I said, even though none of it made any sense, and I did experience, I have to say, when we moved to that area, we were the only Jews in the entire area, did experience some anti-Semitism. I did not understand it, and I didn't know what it meant, but was definitely very exposed to it. And so some of those experiences, kind of deep down there in the core, they come up every once in a while. And that was different from what the rest of my family experienced, because they were in a very tight-knit Jewish community in the downtown area.
Mhm. Um, there was something else I was thinking about just now, but now I can't remember what it was. Um, oh, I was thinking about, even looking at the Exodus in Scripture. You know, we kind of jump right into the middle of the story with, Moses. We get Moses born, and there's the whole incident with the Nile and the Pharaoh's daughter, and then we skip 40 years,
Right.
and we get Moses as an adult who knows that he's a Hebrew, sympathizes with the Hebrews, but he's been raised as a son of Pharaoh. And we have extra biblical works that fill in some of those gaps, but whether they're accurate or just made up, no idea, no way to tell. But I'm certain that there were other things in there. There's the incident where Moses says that he's killed the Egyptian who was beating the Hebrew slave, and he buries him in the sand. And then he says that he was afraid that Pharaoh would know. But there's something about the text that seems to be indicating it's not really the death of this guard that Moses is concerned about. It's that Pharaoh would know that Moses has been appointed to be this Messiah who's going to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt, that he may be more concerned about. And so it seems like there were probably a lot of these landmarks along the way that was preparing the people of Israel and Moses himself for this moment.
Yeah.
And they just didn't know that that's what they were being led to until it happened.
Well, and I think one of the problems, well, it's not a problem, but there was a lot of gaps in scripture, let's
Mm-hmm.
face it.
Yeah,
And the rabbis are very adept at filling those gaps in with some
that is true.
really interesting commentary.
Sometimes very insightful, sometimes
Yeah,
kind of
exactly. You gotta,
odd.
it's hard to roll on that. Like, is this for real or what? But I like to just sort of spend time thinking about, those things. So for example, Moses, I mean, being brought into Pharaoh's house and being raised up to be, essentially second in command, as if he is of the dynastic family. Like, this is no small thing. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the wisdom of God to bring him into the home of what we would call the elites and the ruling class of the time, and have him experience that. And also, when he comes back, I'm sorry, but you just don't go into the presence of Pharaoh. It's like, oh, I think I'll just show up on the steps and, bring me in. He was of the royal line. Even though he wasn't born of it, he was of that dynastic house, and he had every right to come into the presence of Pharaoh. And so his journey of, being a part of the oppressors, and then being moved out into the wilderness and being a part of basically what sounds like nobody, it's out there shepherding sheep.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know much about, Yitro is the priest of Midian. I mean, what does that even mean? But that God used him in a very unique and special way to understand how the mechanics of the world empire of Egypt worked. And so I think he was well acquainted with who the gods were of Egypt, all the various gods connected to the Nile. He had an inside view. We just don't even think about what his life was like for all of those years. Another interesting piece of information I found when I wrote the book on Temple Revealed in Noah's Ark, at that particular period of time, the major god was the god Horus, Horus. And
Mm-hmm.
Horus would basically give to whoever the pharaoh was, he would give him the divine right And the story of Horus, if you go and you can just Google it, you'll find out, is almost identical to the story of Moses about this guy, being found floating and protected from his uncle god
Hmm.
Seth, who wanted to murder him, and all this stuff. And so we go back to the Nile, which is where the home of the gods, and we see Moses is in an ark, not a basket, so all of us have got this little baby in this little basket floating, when in reality, arks at that time made out of reeds were actually very large. They would float these large barge arks down the Nile River from town to town to their temples. So the fact is, this baby in a, he's on a large barge in an area on it that's probably where he was sequestered. But this is how they went from town to town on the Nile River, is on these arks, in order
Hmm.
to go to the various temples to be able to worship. And who were they worshiping? The god Horus, who looks like Moses. So my question to myself is, oh, imagine the princess, by the reeds of the Nile River, and there's a large barge there, and she brings it in and she opens up perhaps, and does, in her mind, is she saying this Moses is the personification of her god Horus? Because that's the god who they worship, and the stories are identical. So, these kind of backstories, I can't, I wasn't there, I don't know, and I don't want to be filling in the blanks like the rabbis, although I am. But you've got to reframe this whole thing. Like, this is a god here, and that's why she took him home, not because I think, I need a baby, I didn't have one, I'm not married, I don't know, whatever. In that ark was her God, Horus, manifested in as a physical being. And of course she would take him back to Pharaoh's house and raise him up. So it's things like that, I try to spend time with. I don't have all the answers on it, but it helps us think outside the box. I'm not a big fan of theology. It has its place and purpose. However, I think we just get so hung up on those boxes of, this
Hmm.
is how it's
Exactly.
supposed to be. And it doesn't allow us to sort of, I hate to use it quite like this, but to be a little more creative in our thinking. And one of my things is, it's okay. It's okay to wonder and think and consider, and maybe it's not quite like this, and that's okay. Because but if you're in a church and you say something like that, you're not in a church anymore, right? They've pretty well
Hmm.
kicked you out. You're not allowed to think. You're not allowed to ask questions of the narrative. And my goal has been just to let people, this is fair game, and you need to wrestle with the scriptures in whatever way, he's called you to do, and it's okay.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, at Common Sense Bible Study, we have all kinds of different backgrounds. I mean, that's pretty much the rule anywhere in the Torah movement, is people are coming from all different places to get there. Um, and there are some ideas that I really don't like and I would rather not promote,
Sure.
but people do need the freedom to be able to ask those questions. So we created a space, controversial topics. If you
Yeah.
want to argue about any crazy idea that you've heard that you believe and you think everybody in the world is wrong, feel free. As long as you're polite, you don't call anybody names, don't lie about anybody. You can talk about any topic you want in that space. And
Yeah.
then, in other places, we're going to be a little bit more conventional
Sure.
because,
Yeah,
yeah, we
there's a
don't want to
time
scare
and
everybody
place
off.
for it. Yeah. And you don't want to be weakening other people's faith, but
Hmm.
you've got to strengthen your own, and that means asking a lot of questions and wrestling with the scriptures and doing your due diligence in your research and understanding.
Hmm.
I would never say, I mean, yes, we just read the Bible, and the Lord really ministers to us in just the very words on the page. And I get that. The book of Psalms is one of the most therapeutic, healing, pieces of work that there is. But there's that, and we don't discount it, but there's also the other. You got to dig. You just absolutely need to do that, because I have a whole workbook connected to my 3 books. And I'm trying to encourage people to at least learn more than they have about the ancient world. And when you do that, you'll be amazed at how many more things in the Bible will make sense. And that is especially true with the Torah, because some of the things that are done, what we call the traditions or whatever, are based on, maybe not based on, but they look like some of the things that are done in the ancient world. So if we have a better
Hmm.
understanding of the ancient Near East culture, then we don't have to freak out or argue or insert our modern mind and make an application that isn't there. So I've really encouraged people in that regard as well. And my 3 books are kind of written from that
Hmm.
perspective.
Yeah, that's good. And don't necessarily believe everything that historians tell you about the past, but
Well, and
because
history's
they have
written
their
by the
winners.
winners.
Yeah.
So,
But you get enough sources together and you're going to get a pretty good picture of reality.
well, we are at a point in human history. I mean, my goodness, you just have to press a button and you have access to a tremendous
Hmm.
amount of sources and resources, et cetera. Like it's never been like this, and we are without excuse. And so in fact, we have too much, maybe. But there's so much. And once, like in the 1800s, when the cuneiform writing, the Babylonian clay tablets were discovered and then began to be translated, I mean, that's like what, 150,000 of them or something. When in human history did have access to all of that, which was it was
Yeah.
so beneficial and so helpful. So, and we have the interesting views of scholars in the 1800s, and you compare with the 1900s, and we see scholars today kind of maybe some pushing the envelope in our minds, but sometimes I'll read a book by a scholar I don't particularly care for, but man, I will find one sentence in that book that just blows me away
Hmm.
and is kind of a game changer. So we need to really be open. Uh, everybody's got something to say. I mean, to a
Yeah.
degree.
Yeah. Well, maybe not everything they have to
Yeah,
say is
correct.
worth the time, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'm really looking forward to finding out what's in the Pompeii scrolls,
Okay. Yeah.
because I mean that's going to be another game changer. We've got an entire library intact from the first century
Yeah.
that yeah, we're going to get a whole new worldview on the Roman Empire.
And it's going to be good because I think that, if we're going to really understand Yeshua and his place in, first century, of Israel, and what he was actually, what is he really doing? Like, how is he really pushing back and resisting Rome in this sort of kind of shadow way? I mean, it's not obvious, but the more we have an understanding what's going on in the Roman world, the more what he did is going to be so mind-blowing.
Hmm.
And you see just how much of a threat he was to the Roman government, to the Herodian dynasty, to the temple leadership. Of course, they wanted him dead. And then you're thinking, well, he's just an itinerant rabbi wandering around Israel, collecting disciples and making very strange statements about things that don't make any sense to us. But oh baby, he is resisting all of the rulers and gods of that world. Like it's
Hmm.
just shocking if we think about it.
Yeah. All right. We are about an hour in, and we've kind of gotten a little off track there, but that's all right. It's all interesting. So,
It's
so I want to invite everybody who is participating in the call. I want to invite your questions. You can type them in the chat or you can raise your hand. We have enough people in the room that probably shouldn't just unmute yourself and shout out, but go ahead and put a hand up or type a question in the chat. Hopefully, y'all been thinking about questions along the way here and writing stuff down. So, who wants to go first? Oh, we got another person coming in. A little bit
better
late to the
late than
game, but
never, I always say. Okay, don't be shy. This is not saying I have all the
yeah,
answers either.
yeah. I know the usual suspects. I know Scott, you've got a question. You always have a question, which I appreciate. That's not a jab. I appreciate it. So don't everybody rush in at once.
Really?
Okay.
Wow.
Go ahead, Hillary. Is that Hill? How do you pronounce your name? You can go ahead and unmute yourself. You're unmuted, but we can't hear you yet. Okay, I'm not sure what's going on there. We'll come back to you, Hillary. Lydia, go ahead.
Well, I always find your story so fascinating, Dina. I was kind of like you, Jay, in that I was the obedient little Catholic girl. You told me to do something, I did it, and never questioned anybody or anything. And one time I did question a priest about something, and I got in a lot of trouble. And so I learned very early that was not what you did. You did not question a religious leader. And then got very involved with Name It and Claim It with the Word of Faith Church. And I thought I had arrived. I thought this was it. I was taking the Bible and practicing it and learning it. And, I praise and worship. Everything was I just thought I had arrived. And my husband and I were in this pretty horrible accident, and nothing happened to us. And he went to work the next day, and I was still pretty shook up. And I just had this conversation with God I was panicking. I was like in fear. And I had this conversation with God, and he asked me if I loved him more than my husband and more than my kids and more than my grandchildren. And then he asked me if I loved him more than my doctrine. And I thought, my doctrine, I said, I thought you and my doctrine were the same. And I felt like I heard him say, if you trust me, I'll lead you to truth, and I'll have you think for yourself. And that think for yourself was such a different concept for me. And from that point on, it's like, okay, I'm going to ask and ask. And if I don't understand, I'm going to ask again. And so it's really fascinating to me to hear people say that is their general personality, is that they do ask. And I learned that our God is okay with us asking. It's okay that I'm confused, and it's okay that I keep asking, like, I don't understand. Can you help me? Can you show me? And I think it's really important that we allow our God we don't need to protect him from our questions. I think he's okay with us asking questions. And I've read all of Dina's books, and I go back and read them, and every time it's just something new. And I really appreciate. So I want to thank you for doing this. And coming out of Egypt, I think we do have one major moment that might do it, but then there's all the other times where Egypt is coming out of us. We have to stop and realize that this isn't bringing good fruit. Let's get it out. So yes,
Yeah,
thank
very
you.
true.
Amen. Thanks, Lydia.
Yeah, your past and all the places that you've been along the road are part of what makes you who you are. But part of that journey is also taking who you used to be out of you. You bring the past with you, and that it becomes a part of you, but you also have to leave it behind. And that's a difficult balance to find.
One of the things too, I do hear this a lot. People are mad at the church because they didn't tell them. How come they didn't tell me? And I feel that's an area we need to grow in as well, because there are a lot of things that I learned. I mean, I was 20 years in church. I mean, it was difficult, but I grew tremendously and learned things that and have a better understanding of how all that world operates, because I feel as a movement or whatever, we have neglected our quote unquote missionary work in reaching people who are in the church. There's an awful lot of people that just are starving to have a better understanding. Now, are they, they'll probably never become quote unquote Torah observant, and that's just fine. But we need to be there ready in season and out to give them an answer and to appreciate, the good things that the church has done for those people, because those people are probably never going to leave. And it can't be just we four and no more. And so I'm really kind of on a thing now. I mean, the goal of the covenant community is Jew and non-Jew. And so let's not forget our brethren who are, in need of hearing from those of us who are maybe a little farther down the road. And usually what's cool now is it used to be that the pastor was the filter for everything, and he's usually the last to figure all this stuff out. But now people don't have those kind of filters. They can go direct and do, research, et cetera, on their own. And so you be there ready to point them in the right direction if they ask. So don't despise the things of the church. Appreciate the good things and just be ready to share whenever you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good answer. Hillary, do you want to go ahead and try again?
Yes.
There you go.
Thank you. That's
All right.
better.
Hi, Hillary.
Oh, hi. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Dinah, good to see you. It's the last time I saw you was live and in person in Ontario, Northern Ontario.
Oh my gosh, yeah, when I did Shavuot.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, that was so long ago.
It was so long ago.
Oh,
My
yeah, that was a
goodness.
great weekend we had.
It sure was. Yes. I miss those. Anyway, I'm really appreciate this, and I haven't read your books yet, but I
Well,
certainly
shame on you.
I know, and I look forward to it. I just saw Rico this weekend,
Okay.
and
Yeah,
he
he was
came
in
to
Toronto, wasn't he?
on Northern Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah, not quite as far as you went, but a good hour out of Toronto. And anyway, I guess I have trouble. I have challenges concerning the calendar. I feel, and for years, I felt very convicted that, well, I was a logistics specialist, FedEx and UPS. So when you do supply chain management, if it's not on time on the right day at the right time, it's late. It's wrong. It's either too early, too late, you've missed your appointment. And so when I hear Father calling me for the Moedim, and he sets a calendar, it's my obligation to understand that calendar, to know what day is the right day and arrive the right day at the right time. That's what my training is as a global account manager. And to make that happen one way or the other, do whatever it takes to make that happen. So that's how I live my life. I find that in order to do that, I've read Dead Sea Scrolls or translations, interpretations of it. Rachel, what's her last name? Anyway, she's a professor, and she's got some very good books on that. And I find David Matthews from Manna from Heaven Ministries teaches. But I find the people that are in my circle here in Ontario, they're following Hillel. And they say, well, the scepter, Judah has the scepter until Shiloh comes. And my argument is, well, Shiloh did come. He's already come. And Shiloh is the scepter. He has the scepter. And his name is Yeshua HaMashiach. And he's been and come. And they're saying, well, he only came as the lamb. He hasn't come as the king. Until he comes as the king, he hasn't got the scepter. And I say, he never changes. Yahweh is once and for all. He is King, Creator, God, his word, whether he came in the flesh as, was the flesh is not less of him. And whether he came as a pillar of fire or smoke or a burning bush, or as the Father in the flesh, once, second, twice, he's all in all, always. He is all in all, always. He doesn't change. He hasn't changed. He won't be more. He won't be less. So Judah, we have, our obligation is to understand, Father, we all have the Holy Spirit, the Ruach in us, teaching us. And so I, at this point, I keep the Enoch calendar, and I go by the spring equinox as helping me find the first day of the new year, and then count my 14 days. I'm always way off compared to the rest of the group. But I try for the sake of camaraderie, for being echad with others. I'll do an April 22nd Passover. Well, not April 22nd. I'll do it the second Passover because I'm still in exile. So I can't do it in Jerusalem. And if I can't do it where God's put his name, where he's put his shin, then I am still on a long journey, and I can't do it the way he told me to do it. So I go through emotional, mental gyrations year after year. Here we are again at Passover. This last Wednesday was my last day of unleavened bread for the Passover, which I memorialize. I can't do it right, but I do a Last Supper, wine and bread memorial to Yeshua as my Messiah. And then we'll do it again in a month. And then I'll do it on the 22nd again, in a sense. And yet, and David Matthews, very clearly, he's been teaching on it lately, and said, if you know the right thing to do and you don't do it, that's sin. And for me to compromise myself by trying to be acceptable that those that are under the Hillel scepter, and doing it by his calendar, if I feel that in my heart I'm being truer to Father by doing it by the Enoch calendar, the solar calendar, and the moon, then I want to do my best for him. I want to do my best. I might be wrong, but at least I'm wrong of my own right. I'm wrong. It's through my very best.
You have the right to be wrong. Absolutely.
And not through compromising for others. Like Lori and Craig.
Now that's a mouthful. That was a huge, huge mouthful. So I can tell that you're wrestling, and that, wrestling is good. And so you're probably not going to like maybe what I have to say. Having, was born, raised in a Jewish home, obviously we celebrated the Hillel calendar my whole life. I have no problem with it whatsoever. Again, for me, it goes back to studying the context of things, and historically, there's periods where the Zadokite calendar, et cetera, et cetera. But the problem with the whole thing is that it produces fruit that divides, which is not of the Father. So anything that's going to divide and create confusion is a problem. So our job is to find a way to bring unity, and, one can have their own convictions and do, whatever. I mean, I have no problem with that, but I'm more concerned about the community at large than I am about individual convictions. And I feel this area has been such a huge problem. It really, it upsets me most of this functions within a structure that we don't have. And I think part of the problem as well is we have, in this sort of messianic Hebrew roots thing, how do I put this gently? We have neglected to push ahead into what Yeshua is really all about. And he handed off the kingdom, if you will, to his disciples, his 12, who in turn handed it off to the whole world. And he made the statement that his body functioned as the temple. So, what does that even mean? And as we moved into the New Testament, we could classically put it's like we had an Exodus, now we have a new Exodus. We have a creation, now we have a new creation. We have a Moses, now we have a new Moses. We had tribal leaders, now we have disciples. We had a tabernacle, now we have Yeshua who tabernacled amongst us. We have a Mount Sinai, now we have a, Mount Zion, if you will. We have a new Passover. We have a new promised land. We have a new cup. We have a new covenant. We have new bread. We have a new body. So our job now, how on earth do we take all that and figure out a way for the community? This is all for the community to heal and to grow and to be of such strength that we move out as a community to impact the world. So the problem with arguing over the calendar, for one example in this way, is, again, we show the world that we are totally divided and crazy. I'm not saying you're crazy, but that's, we show that.
Yeah.
We show the world that, and we don't, well, no, I don't want to go there, but we are not being effective out there because we have brought everything in here. We are so focused and we have insulated and isolated ourselves against the world. So what can we do as a community to bind together in order to be effective out there and to spread the seed of the kingdom to the four corners of the earth? So that's kind of my big beef about that, because if it brought everyone together, I'm like, well, hallelujah, we'll all just do this. But obviously different communities celebrate different way. I'm not going to argue. I don't have any problem with that. But again, the bigger picture is what is Messiah Yeshua trying to accomplish in us as a community, not as individuals.
Don't you think it's all about him? It's all about
absolutely.
lifting him up. But if he's the head and we just all lift him up, we all come together as one, Ahad in him, in Father. The Son's the heart of the Father, and we're the heart of the Son. And all together we are one. Mm-hmm. We are one within each other. And then everything else we're all on a path of learning, understanding. We'll never all be on the same path, learning the same thing at the same time, understanding it all equally in this life.
But I think the Sermon on the Mount, for me, is that place, because Yeshua is kind of dealing with the same problem. All these people have come. Well, first of all, he's addressing the disciples. But then you've got people from all different walks and backgrounds that have come to this location. They're from Jerusalem, from Judea. They're zealots from the Decapolis area, Gamla, and they're Romans, and there's priests, and there's everything there. And so his goal in that is how to build and bridge this community and make it one community. So the things that he outlines there are hard things. They're hard sayings, and they require some major heart transformation. And I think that's the pattern we should look at. And I don't care what controversy we're dealing with. I do feel that whole event is a way for us to bridge all this. But absolutely the case, he's it. There, nothing else matters. But in order, we have to walk on the journey, and we can all agree, yes, we worship him, but he did give us a way to walk through this journey on earth, through this wilderness land on the earth. And I think all of that is sort of laid out, if you will, in the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah. Okay.
That's just me,
like if I hadn't said no to the church, I'd still be in the church. If I'd gone with the pastor who said, no, you can't talk about the Old Testament, it's all about the new. No, the Torah is nailed to the cross. If I had said, well, I have to stay with them of one mind and one heart because we need to be one. Well, one in error doesn't do it. One in I wouldn't be where I am, walking as well as I can in Torah, understanding as much Hebrew, as little as I know, but it's still more than I ever knew then. And before that, I was raised in a family of theosophists, of Satanists. And I got out of that, and then in my 30s became a born-again, so-called fundamentalist Christian. And then in my 50s, found Torah. And Monty Judah and Eddie Chumney and Rico Cortez and you and I go on. But I have to keep, I can't stop. I can't stop and say I have to stop here because I can't look so different from everybody else. I have to follow the Ruach. I have to keep studying. I have to keep listening to your teachings. Rico said, stop, don't go to so many teachers. Well, how many's enough? Who's got enough truth? What is wrong? Exactly. And he was reading your books. So when do you stop, Rico? You're going to Joe Good, and now you read Dinah's books, and I'm to read your books, and then Kyle's under you, and you say he's a great teacher, and there's Lori and Craig sitting in the front row.
Yeah. I think it's good to keep learning and always looking for truth. I mean, we're never going to have it all. We're never going to understand everything.
We ain't gonna arrive.
And I think that one of the things that frustrates me about the whole calendar issue, and I think that Dinah is probably on the same page here, is that it doesn't bother me when people come to a different conclusion about the way and the time we're supposed to be doing things, as long as they're sincere about it and they're actually following what they believe is true and doing their homework. What really bothers me to no end is when people argue about it and call each other pagans and all kinds of other stuff. Like I follow the standard rabbinic calendar, not because I'm trying to be Jewish or because I think Hillel necessarily knew everything, but because I've researched some of the alternatives, and I haven't found a good reason not to be in union with the most believers I can. If somebody else has come to a firm conclusion that this other calendar is definitely the right one, I've researched everything, this is what we're supposed to be doing, then great. I'm all for you following that path and keeping the feast when you believe God wants you to do it, as long as it doesn't spill over into calling everybody else liars and ingenuous. I'm not saying that you do that. I've seen so much of that online that I just get sick of it.
Yeah, it's pretty ugly stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's no.
So I see Kevin there's had his hand up for a little bit.
I'm sorry, I've monopolized you, and I appreciate it.
Oh, no, it's okay. It was great to see you, Hillary. Say hi to Craig.
Thanks, Dinah. I will.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you, dear.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Welcome, Kevin. It's good to see you.
Kevin.
Yeah. Hey, what's going on? I just about the Hebrew roots movement / Messianic movement. There's a lot of confusion, and because it's very, and I use this word decentralized, there's a lot of difference of preferences and views, as we just talked about. And I think the big thing is we need to distinguish between convictions versus preferences, and the biblical basis versus individual interpretation. And I think that the scriptures speak upon conscience heavily, especially in Romans, I believe, later on that we're going through, but conscience and not doing anything against your conscience if you believe it's a sin. So there are some things that we need to let people have that conviction and not judge them on personal conviction. But then it works the other way around, where that person shouldn't condemn someone based upon their personal convictions.
Mhm.
What's your thoughts on that?
Couldn't agree more. I mean, the problem with the Messianic Hebrew Roots movement is become a separatist movement. I can't, if I get nothing through tonight, I am just solidly in the place where we have got to figure out how to work together as a community. And that doesn't, we don't have to live in the same place, but we are not representing ourselves well to the world outside. And nobody seems to be concerned about that. And not that I've arrived, but I am very concerned about it, because the comments and things that I often hear from, and they don't understand where we're coming from. It's never helpful. I try my level best to, I'm in a community and I try to be accountable to that community. Do I agree with everything? Not hardly, but mostly I keep my mouth shut, because why do I need to break the bond of peace over what you just mentioned? Preferences, I'm not going to argue over that. I have convictions about things. And I find in a lot of, well, not a lot, but sometimes I just have to keep my mouth shut, because I may cause more harm than good in trying to, get someone else to see my conviction or agree with my conviction. It really always comes back to this concept of wrestling. And that's where, there are people with really strong convictions. I say hallelujah, it's wonderful. But when you are in the community, you've got to figure out a way to temper that and work together. There's just not enough working together for the goal of spreading the kingdom to the whole world and rescuing those that are, held captive by, by sin or whatever. And I feel we've lost our way. And it's not I think it should be the most important, and unfortunately it isn't. So does that help any?
Yeah. I just like to bounce that off of you and get your insight, and that was really good because we definitely we see this within the church
Mhm.
so much,
Yeah.
and all I see online on YouTube is just bashing
Yeah.
people, and especially I watched a podcast with Ali Beth Stuckey, and she had these people from Cultish on, which is more of I don't know if you know who Jeff Durbin is, but they're more in that camp. And I took down a bunch of notes because they talked about the Hebrew roots movement and
Mm.
saying it's a false gospel. And I come from my background is yes, I grew up in a Joel Olstein type church, and I grew up in a fundamental independent Baptist church, but I never had soul ties to that any of those religious sects.
Mhm.
Um, I I was saved just miraculously in just in the pouring rain, crying out to the Father and asking for forgiveness, and could not even explain what happened during that moment. But the next day, my whole passions and life was just changing. I just didn't want to be the same. It was awesome. But when I started reading the scriptures, I had this appreciation of the Old Testament right off the bat. And when I started reading the scriptures, I've seen how far we deviated from the scriptures. And then when I hear on the podcast that these people are talking about the Hebrew roots movement and it's a false gospel, and they follow Armstrongism from Herbert Armstrong, they were saying that these people don't believe in the Trinity and these people believe in you can't say Jesus. And I was like, well, they really don't even understand that that's not true. There are a lot of people that are not like that. But just like you have the Westboro Baptist,
Mhm.
they don't speak for all Baptists. And so it was really disheartening to hear these people that are considered Christians, they would call themselves Christians, call the Hebrew roots movement or the Messianic a cult. Those are very strong words, and I I just I don't know what your thoughts are on all of that, but they do see that there is a lot of division amongst the group, and so it's interesting how you're talking about this. I just watched this the other day, and it's just interesting because it couldn't be further from the truth,
Right.
and it I just don't see how, like I know that the people in, you can call it Hebrew roots, you can call it whatever. I just call it biblical Christianity. I'm just trying to follow what's in the scriptures, and I don't see anybody in this Messianic Hebrew roots speaking. I mean, there are people that speak that, but for the most part, they want to. I don't think they would call them not Christians. I don't think they would say they're part of a cult, and so it's hard to hear that from other Christians and
Sure.
calling this a cult like it would be Jehovah Witness or Mormonism.
Well, it's not a surprise, honestly, because we haven't done a very good job. I think we have a lot of work to do because if people have formulated that opinion, that means they've seen us as separating ourselves, dividing ourselves, and doing something, that I think within they would feel more comfortable within the Christian world between like an Assemblies of God or a Foursquare or whatever. But they have determined by the action and online, it's like it just every Torah teacher seeking after his 15 minutes of fame, just confusing another person. It ends up in the same place that I keep saying that as a body that is supposed to work. We're not separate and different from the rest of the body. Now we have other convictions. I get that. And we have traditions and we celebrate in ways that are not the same. And that's okay. I mean, if you went to the Middle East and look at the Coptic Christians, they'd be doing different stuff. Do we say, that they're not Christians? But I feel we have so separated ourselves. And then I don't think it's as bad now as it used to be, but this like obsession with, what's the word I want? Can't think of it. But, we are so fixated on being too smart by half and, lording it over on others because we know all this stuff and you don't. Like, this is not healthy and it's not working. And I think, I don't know what it's going to take. And I forget who mentioned part of the issues because this is a decentralized, part of it's I can't even call it an organization. Whatever it is, it's decentralized, and so that lends itself to disparate groups doing things. And not that we want a centralized power here telling us what to do. One of the things that I've been really kind of focusing on is trying to step back and look at the big overall picture. And that's the message that I continue to try to bring to others, to help them understand, like, what is creation? How does that function? What does that mean? How to see the difference between how the world, or what I call empire, operates and how the kingdom of heaven operates. What does that clash look like? When you can step back and talk in larger terms and help them to see the bigger picture of sort of creational order versus, empire chaos, which is, running all through the Bible, that will help. That is easier for them to, to embrace than when we get locked into theological arguments, even within the Messianic and Hebrew roots community. And it's one of the reasons I wrote my books, is to kind of help us step back and see that 50,000-foot view, because that's the place where we're going to engage. We're never going to be able to engage people over the name, over the calendar, over this other. I mean, it's not going to happen. But if you can see that there is this clash of kingdoms in the Bible, and that's the overt message, and that the whole story of the Bible is the story of how does a creational order, how does God restore creational order in the universe? That's more effective, I think, sometimes with ministry than all the minutia that we argue over. So that's kind of where I've been. That's kind of been my lane of the last few years, because I'm trying to figure out how to reach a larger audience.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate your comments for sure.
Yep. Thank you, Kevin.
Anybody else? Does that make sense too? That's why I encourage you to read the books to get a better sense of that. And all my stuff on there, just I just see things in way bigger terms than I used to. I believe that's Scott in the car.
Yeah, go ahead, Scott. Just make sure to mute yourself again when
Yeah,
you're done
thank
speaking.
you.
Mute yourself again when you're done speaking.
I will. Thank you. Yeah, just a comment to sort of extrapolate on what you just brought up. It's almost as if the Hebrew roots is in the king's phase of the Bible, and that is multiple kingdoms, multiple leaders. It's not really codified as a kingdom as of yet. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. I thought that was an interesting analogy.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. No idea where this all ends up, but I'm going to beat a dead horse, community. That's what you should, his death and burial and resurrection was in order to pass off the kingdom to the 12 and then to the whole world. They didn't keep it within themselves and say, oh, we've arrived, this is ours, it's about the kingdom spreading to bring healing and deliverance. We are partners with God, and he has equipped us as his image bearers to spread those seeds everywhere we go. Because there are people suffering mightily, and you can see this in our country now. The vulnerable, those with no voice, the uninfluential, people are, medically broken and, suffer, and there's just so much heartache and suffering right now. And this other stuff's just a distraction. And we need to minister to those with the understanding and wisdom that God has given us. And he's given us a tremendous amount. So let's not waste it on arguing and dividing.
Good word.
Anybody else? Comments, questions, going once, going twice?
Okay. Well, if not, Dinah, I know that you've got some projects going on in, just from looking at your books and some of your articles, you spent a lot of time, studying Genesis 1, for example, the Garden of Eden, Creation Week, and the temple. Those seem to be two big topics that come up quite a bit. But what are you working on right now?
Well, it's been a challenging 6 or 8 months because my husband had open heart surgery at the end of August.
That's rough.
And I was in a fog for several months taking care of him. And then I finally my brain started appearing again. And then he had back surgery 2 weeks ago. So it's been a challenging season for me. Sort of the main thing that I wrote a workbook that goes with all 3 books. Everything's on Amazon. So the goal there was to be able, and if any of you are interested, just send me a note. Everyone, I try to do about 3 times a year, but I teach the course, and it's 6 weeks or 12 weeks, depending on my mood, but in which I lay all the groundwork for the 3 books. Because in my mind, if you understand Genesis 1 through Genesis 11, the major principles of creational order versus chaos, if you understand temple building pattern, because God made a temple, a universal temple, if you will, if you can begin, I've tried to take those topics to help you, like the cosmic mountain, like what does that even mean? The cosmology of the ancient world, the waters of chaos, understanding what kings were in the ancient world. They were synonymous with trees. We see that with like the great cedars of Lebanon. Remember King Nebuchadnezzar being compared to trees. and they were hunters. So all this type of language that's very much part of the ancient Near East world, I've put into a course, and I take you through that to give you as much, equip you as best I can, so that you can better understand the scriptures, and it'll help you understand a lot of things in the prophets and in the New Testament. Just thinking about, just quickly, just even the Exodus, because the entire Exodus pattern is the pattern of creation. So you go through Genesis chapter 1 and you see the separation, the division between the heavens above and the earth below, and the separating of the waters, and you separate dry ground and from the seas, and this idea of dry ground appearing and seed planted and seeds sprouting, and that you had darkness, and then the deep in that first few verses, and then the Spirit hovering over it. And then just go read Exodus 15, the Song of Moshe or the Song of Miriam, and you're going, all the same themes are right there, that the children of Israel had to cross on dry ground, and the waters separated. And he took them from a womb as they were in Goshen, living inside another nation. And he brought them through the birth canal, and he took them out into the wilderness, to the mountain. It just repeats. And then you see Jesus, Yeshua, in chapter 6 of John. It's the same story. And he crosses over the Sea of Galilee, and he walks on the water as the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters. Like, it's just this constant story being repeated. And so that's my goal, is to help you see the repeated patterns, and that Yeshua is ultimately the culmination of the creation story and the recreation of a new creation temple, whereas that people will approach in the protocol that was designed for them to approach Yahweh on the mountain. They would approach him because the kingdom of God is present in him. Again, he is imparted that into us. So I've been working on that. I've got a couple of conferences coming up. I'm kind of on a Sermon on the Mount kick right now. I did a teaching in our community last week, and I'm going to do 2 more to try to help people understand that in a better way. I was doing, believe it or not, a news show, Israel TV network, but the news is so depressing, I can't even handle it now. It used to be like there was a piece of news every week, and now there's like 6 million pieces of news every hour. So it's just completely overwhelming. But I am really, fixated on helping people understand the clash of these 2 kingdoms that are, it's all present through the scriptures. And I'm trying to figure out, is there another book in me about that? I'm really obsessing over the New Testament as Exodus 2.0. Now, there are scholars who have written about this, so I'd have to do it in a slightly different way. So that's kind of, I guess, what I've been doing lately. I was derailed for about 6 months, and I really didn't do anything, but I thought a lot.
Yeah, nice. I mean, we had, God loves patterns. You can see it all through scripture.
Yeah.
And we had Tony Robinson on a couple of months ago to talk about patterns in Revelation.
Oh, he's that was pretty cool. Man of chiasm.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a short course on chiasms for premium subscribers. And I don't make any money doing this. It just barely breaks even.
Who does?
Yeah. But it's really, the premium subscription is really just a way to support this ministry, and you get a couple of little extra bonuses. There's a course on chiasms and one on the Sabbath, and I'm working on a series on who wrote the Bible, each of the authors, and how do we know that this guy actually wrote this book, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's scholars that argue that there's like 4 to 5 different authors of Isaiah. Mm-hmm. It's just wild. You're like, okay, well, I don't know. Who does know? Did Matthew really write Matthew? Or, so that's all that's good. I think if you can just not get stuck in theology, you're well ahead of the game of most, I think.
Once you classify yourself as in an ism, then once you classify yourself in an ism, then you're walling yourself off from so many different possibilities, different understandings that you might be missing.
again, I'm all about the big picture. And then if I can give you the big picture, then you can fill in with all the wonderful research and personal study that you've done. It'll all connect. I'm just there to help you connect it all back is all, because you've all done your own work. You know, there's scriptures in your life, you know, inside and out, and you just want to kind of know where they fit. So my hope is just to give you that, you know, that broad outline, and now you can see where the work you've done fits.
Yeah, I appreciate that. If you had to send everybody to one resource, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. Do you mean an
And
ancient
any of your
resource, a
work?
modern? I would have to, for me, I don't know if any of you guys have heard of L. Michael Morales. Anybody
I
familiar with
haven't,
him?
no.
His book, The Tabernacle Prefigured, man, that it's still, when I read it, it just blew my mind. I love that book. Now, if any of you are interested, because the book's like $100 if you're lucky and can find it. It was written, it's a Dutch publisher. I have no idea why he did that because they're so expensive. But I do have a PDF of the dissertation that he wrote for that. So if you send me an email, and Jay, if you could put my email address, if any of you are interested in that, I'll send you the PDF and you can read it. But I have to say, you know, I mean, I've got a ton of resources, but that one for me was absolutely groundbreaking.
Your website has a Gmail address. Should I use that one?
No, let's use this
Okay.
one. This one's easy. You can write it. It's just Dinah Dye, DINAHDYE at protonmail.com.
Okay.
So you put it in the notes. You guys send me a note, and I'll send that PDF to you if you have an interest in it. And I don't know. I love, and he's got it. I just ordered his book on Exodus, and he's got a new one coming out on Numbers. I'm so excited. I can't stand it. Like we just track. I track with where he's at. In fact, he read 2 of my books and he liked them. So I was like, wow, what a compliment. He even wrote like a little review for my garden book.
Nice.
I'm going, that was the highest compliment anybody could ever pay me. You know, no one else
Yeah,
would
I
ever have to
imagine.
say anything after that.
Yeah. All right. Well, is there anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
Let me see if I've got anything here that I want to say. So I would just, in closing, if you can understand that the whole concept of the Bible is to lead us to creational order, and the creational order of Yahweh is radically different from the world's view of humanity. God sees humanity with dignity and value, and he raises up humanity and regenerates the human heart through the process of the death and burial and resurrection of Yeshua. And he raises up that beast nature, that human nature that's manipulative and deceitful and deceptive and all that stuff.
Prideful.
And all that, and just take your pick, because that's how empire rolls, right? With those types of attributes. And so creational order, which is the absolute basic foundation of the scriptures, is a radical alternative to the world's view of humanity. And that's why the Bible stands out apart from all other works through the course of human history. And so it raises our status so that we can stand in the presence of God in the protocol in that covenant relationship. And the Bible's really telling the story using completely dysfunctional families and failed human beings to show how he raises up the heart of mankind. It's all about all of mankind, not just about us.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I really appreciate you being here, having this conversation with us. This really has been great. I've enjoyed it. And I think it's been good for all of us.
Well,
And
cool.
I appreciate all of you joining us for this call too, and your input. And all of you who are new in the last week or two, I hope you stick around, and you can if you log into the Common Sense Bible Study portal, on the left-hand menu, there's a link for our video index. And that contains all of our previous weekly Bible studies, all of our conversations like this that we've had. They're all listed in there. Hundreds of hours probably by now. I don't really know. Lots of great stuff in there. You can get caught up on the Roman study and join us for our Thursday night Bible studies when we start up again in May.
So Jay, several people asked me if there's like a replay, like do we have something I could post on Facebook or?
Yeah, since it's live streaming to YouTube, it'll be there as soon as that's done processing.
Okay.
And I will also upload the recording to Rumble.
Okay, perfect. Just send me the links because I'll forget.
Okay, will do.
All right. Well, great to have you all. I hope this was a blessing to you. It was fun to be
Yep.
here and share my early experiences.
Yeah, thank you.
As they are.
And would you mind closing us out in prayer?
Sure. Lord, we just we thank you for your people. We thank you that you have made us your image bearers. We are so grateful that you've been willing to partner with us to see the tikkun olam, the repairing of the world, to bring in the world to come. You are a great and magnificent God, and you love us with an everlasting love. And I pray that you would just cement that in our hearts. And Lord, just restore your community as you want it to be, so that we can be effective image bearers across the earth. And we just praise and thank you in the name of Yeshua. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Appreciate
All right,
y'all,
guys.
and hope to
See
see you
you
again
next
soon.
time.